Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third LinkedIn Live in the series. This is hosted by the Scale Up Collective. My name's Simon Prince. I'm one of the fractional CMOs here. And today we're going to be talking about how to build a growth budget that founders and boards will back. So today I'm really pleased to welcome to this session Andrew Johnson. Andrew is a superb and experienced CFO working across B2B brands and B2C, such as Pow Wow Now, Mindful Chef, Lucky Saint, and currently in his role as functional mushroom brand, DIRTEA. Andrew's also spent time working as a CEO of a scaling B2B, so he's got quite a unique perspective on things. Good to have you on board today, Andrew.
Thank you, Simon. It's great to be here.
Good stuff. So the topic obviously is how to build a marketing budget that a board or a founder will back. So it'd probably be good if we start by outlining the framing of this. What are the problems that you're seeing and what are the challenges that you get as a CFO? Just a little bit of an opening framing, if you could.
Yeah, sure. Most growth budgets don't fail due to lack of effort. I think they really fail because they just don't stand up commercially. What I kind of see from time to time is people come with their marketing, starting with the costs element, but not building out my case. And I think really looking at it from this is the opportunity. This is why we must invest in this area. And this is where we can see the benefits. And then you're kind of layering in the costs. And then there's some, actual challenge and probing as you kind of work out how that's going to look.
Okay. So I guess really then it's about how do you build and frame a budget that is attractive to the CEO and the CFO and the board so that it makes it not a cost decision, it makes it really a sort of an investment decision. Okay, so let's start at the beginning then. So where do you feel is the best place to actually start? Because what I see from time to time is teams jumping straight into the numbers. They need to talk about the lines, the channels, the tactics they want to invest in. And actually, they don't really stop to think about sort of the commercials and the reality of what they're asking for. From your side, when someone comes to you, how should they be thinking about building the starting point and what's the logical place to do that?
I think sometimes taking your marketing hat off to some degree and going, okay, I'm the CEO, I'm the CFO. What are they worried about? Where are their challenges at? Where's the business at? So kind of, if you can frame that in a way that it helps solve their problems. So is growth a challenge? Okay, great. So I'm going to frame this as a great growth opportunity. Or it could be looking at the product set and going, our current products aren't getting retention. This new feature or this new product is ultimately going to be the thing that's going to solve that challenge. I think really understanding their concerns and issues and then framing it around how you're ultimately teaming up together to solve that problem collectively.
Okay, so rather than coming sort of with lines in a spreadsheet, you're coming with an opportunity to build an investment case. So you've got to, like you said, you've got to know your numbers, you've got to understand the return on investment, you've got to understand the costs like your CAC and your ACV and stuff. But so really making sure that you know the commercial upside for the business. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you don't have a really detailed understanding of the opportunity, how it's going to be delivered and why you're super excited and confident in that, I think for me, it all falls down at that point.
Yeah, we've spoken about this in the past, haven't we, in terms of that sort of credibility gap and someone coming with a large line, of investment and request and not having the numbers or not knowing the upside or opportunity or not knowing how that even works within the business itself just doesn't seem right. So closing that credibility gap is crucial, isn't it?
Absolutely. I suppose there's one other bit I kind of want to touch on is sometimes it's not that the opportunity is wrong, it's that the timing is wrong. So where it is in your budget cycle, where it is in terms of what the business needs. You could have had an amazing year and actually it's an opportunity that we just need to push out down the line. It's not for this year, but it's potentially for next year. And I think understanding that and going, actually, at the moment, we're taking additional risk at this time in the year is not what the business needs. And that could be challenges that you're not, party to in terms of cash flow, profitability. It might seem the best opportunity for revenue, but it may hurt the P&L in other ways. So I think understanding that and understanding that it may not be a noun like a dead no, it's just no, not now.
Okay. And just on that, I mean, people might not be aware of sort of that timing risk in terms of, like you say, cash flow or, quarter one versus quarter four. What typically are you looking when you look at a budget and the way it's broken down and you're thinking from a financial perspective? What are the trade-offs you're making when when thinking about the timing specifically?
There's elements, one of my key concerns is obviously cash and making sure the business can,
Mm.
never runs out of money. Ultimately, if there's an investment opportunity, how are we going to fund it? Do we need some short-term funding? Can it be funded by, our own cash flow? I think that's pretty key. And then towards the end of the year, you have a snapshot with your balance sheet where people evaluate the health of the business based on the last day of the calendar year. And if your cash balance is looking healthy, that obviously looks good for creditors. It looks good for investors. Obviously, if that's had a massive dent because you've just invested in something 2 or 3 weeks out from a year end, then that's something that I wouldn't want to do.
Right. So really sort of knowing, so the CMO or the person coming from marketing with the budget really needs to understand the sort of the wider commercials of the organization. That's crucial, isn't it? So,
Really.
so I guess it's then about demonstrating sort of outcomes and ownership rather than just justifying. So if I can stand in front of you and say, look, the reason we're doing this, and I understand the business, I understand the commercials and the metrics, it's making it a far easier decision for you, isn't it? Rather than just coming here with a sort of a cost line. So what would be some of your tips for doing that then, in terms of like how tightly and how aligned should marketing teams be with finance teams?
I love to lean in really close, as you know, Simon, with the marketing team, and basically looking like a little bit of a sparring partner where there's opportunities, and I like to challenge them to go like, what happens if we invest more?
Mm,
I think, are we being conservative on this? And seeing how comfortable they feel around that then gives me some sort of appetite for, you know, the downside as well as the upside. I kind of have
mm,
to flip flop between the upside and the downside and protect the business from the downside case while also not prevent it from big opportunities in terms of growth. So I think looking at it as a little bit of a sparring match, making sure your budget you can test some scrutiny and
yeah.
look at metrics. And obviously, the longer you've worked together, that relationship can build and trust can form. You've got a past track record. I think, when you're coming into it fresh, it's slightly more challenging because you don't have that working chemistry. But I think that's something you should build and lean into.
I remember coming to you years ago with a budget plan, and really I presented the best case scenarios. And I remember you just sort of saying, well, what happens if this doesn't work? And what happens if, we're off? I hadn't thought about that. And that goes back to that credibility gap, doesn't it? It's like I hadn't prepared or hadn't thought about sort of the scenario plays that we could go through. And actually, as you and I worked through it, it became really apparent that actually there was multiple different ways this could play out. But if we hadn't have had that conversation, we wouldn't have understood that. So I think, making sure that the CMO and the CFO, or the senior leads within both teams, are as aligned as possible is a good thing. I can remember you and I going actually out and looking at the ads and the creative in the wild and understanding the impact it was having, and that obviously helped to sell in. So again, it's working on that credibility, isn't it?
I think that's a good point, actually, because I think just touching on that, I think you really want to, if you can bring that CFO and get them into the touch points, you were great at doing that in terms of come and see the creative, come and see where the money's going, and ultimately see the benefit of it. And I think actually getting closer emotional attachment to it, times I think finance people can tend to look at everything through an Excel spreadsheet or through a chart. And I think actually getting closer to that, I think is super valuable.
Yeah, I know it worked. And I guess it's kind of like we built that sort of shared narrative, didn't we, on what we were trying to achieve, both from a sort of you unlocking the investment opportunity and me giving you the vehicle to do that. And I think having us aligned on that was super useful. So one of the things then we definitely both would agree on is that the relationship between the CFO and the CMO is crucially important, or just marketing and finance in general. They've got to be tight. It's not just, siloed work streams. It's got to be super tight, because that creates that unified front, doesn't it? It creates that sort of, like you said, shared narrative and viewpoints. I guess the other thing then is it also creates a challenge. So how do you mitigate that challenge to come to a point where you actually build something really robust together, rather than just being sort of maybe locking horns or being slightly in disagreement? How would you sort of work and finesse that together?
I think, there are times where you've got to, the plan, the opportunity is going to be shut down, and accept that, nothing to do with, it's nothing to do with the plan. It's ultimately due to the wider business remit.
Mm.
I think sometimes accepting that and not just, pushing something continually to badger them. Ultimately, just accept that it's not going to happen right now. I think understanding those timeframes, but also challenging and saying, I don't understand why. Can you help me understand, what the wider business needs are and why this isn't a good opportunity right now? and why you can't give me more money. think I think there's always this feeling that the finance team will, always trying to rein in the purse strings, and the marketing team are always trying to, spend more and more to, fuel growth.
Mm.
But I think it's a balancing act. I think, if you get it right, it can be super successful partnership.
It comes back to like just agreeing how you want to operate together, and then also the assumptions, the timelines, and sort of that level of risk that you're both prepared to invest. Because marketing isn't often the most expensive line in the P&L, and it's a variable cost. And we know that when times are tough, it gets pressured, but when times are good, it's also the more is invested. So if you understand that and the levels of risk, and you're open to that discussion, then it's definitely a better relationship. And you've got a unique perspective, having sort of done the sort of the top seat role as well. And because marketing sits in that uncomfortable position, like we just said, what would be your recommendations for the CFO and the CMO when going to that board, when going to the top seat or the CEO, in terms of how do they need to treat marketing? How do they need to think about the relationship between finance and marketing? What would you sort of?
I think if you can get a completely aligned view, so you're saying the same thing, you believe in the same opportunity, you know where the risks are, but also you can provide the down case. So I kind of touch the word I kind of like to use is like an optionality. It's kind of looking at, okay, things haven't quite, what can we do? What's the backup plan? Are there any other levers at our disposal that if in Q1 we haven't got the return, what can we do in Q2, 3, and 4 to basically mitigate some of the downside? And actually, I think that shared responsibility, as much as you're looking after the growth, you're also looking after the bottom line as well. And I think understand building in those scenarios is super important.
So would you advise always showing those scenarios, like best and worst case scenarios, or would you always go?
Absolutely. I mean, I think if you table it first, it shows that you're already, it's not that you don't believe in the plan, it's that you've got a protection plan as well. And by tabling it, you're also bringing it to them and going, look at the downside in this position, but this upside case solves these problems and ultimately gives us a great position for the go forward. And I think it becomes much harder to turn down when you've factored in both sides.
Yeah, I guess because I'll keep saying it, but it does really sort of credibility. It shows that you understand the business's overarching objective, how the cash flow works, the pros and cons, but presenting it as an investment, but also this is risk planning here, and this is what happens if things don't go right. It's just prudent, isn't it? So strong recommendation is have two scenarios. Have the best case scenario built around strong, reasonable numbers, not best case numbers, because often we don't hit those, but strong, reasonable growth numbers. And then would you also have an option that says, well, if things are going well, could we also do? So we've almost got three scenarios here. We've got like, this is the good plan. This is if it's stretched and we're doing really, really well. Here's also a plan if we're not doing so well.
100%. Yeah. If you, making sure that if there's a market appetite, if there's, acquisition to be won, that you don't essentially leave revenue on the table, and you maximize the growth opportunity and making sure it's there. If this happens, is there appetite to take on a bit more investment? But then it's like, okay, great, but where would you spend it? So making sure you then have that answer to go, yeah, I would spend it here, here, and here, and this is the upside I'd see from it.
Okay, and would you focus that on a couple of real strategic bets, or would you spread it across the board, or how would you? If a bit more, let's say 20% is more is available, would you just focus it on a couple of, like your real core growth channels? Would you invest it broadly?
I think it's got to be case by case. I don't think you can. It depends on the scenario. I know quite a lot of the audience is B2B, but I've spent quite a lot of time recently in B2C, and quite often the incremental gains, as you're talking about, aren't as good as they are earlier on in the funnel. You might spend a 20, but actually the cost per acquisition is so much higher. And I think it's understanding those metrics that, there is some of your past performance doesn't necessarily translate. So I spend an extra 20,000, I'm not going to get the same returns as the first 20,000. And I think being realistic on that, I think is crucial. Otherwise you end up, you had a good plan, you delivered on your number, and then your second, your accelerator case kind of let you down. So I think just being being cautious on that, and making sure that you're spending that money wisely. I think it's something I always challenge is, and I think I've done it with you personally, is would you spend this money if that's not money? Would you mortgage your house and spend this £200,000-300,000 on this case because you really believe in this upside? Obviously, I'm
Mm.
not going to do that, but it's like that really gives me some level of confidence how much the CMO believes in this, and actually, do they, would they back the house on it?
Yeah.
Would they do this if they owned the whole business? So I think that really focuses your mind.
Yeah. I think, yeah, backing just shows your confidence in your own plan, doesn't it? If you're prepared to put your own investment, your own money, and just thinking like that. And I know many businesses have scaled very successfully by getting all of their employees to think, if this was yours, what would you do? And that's no different from if this was your money, if this was your product, if this was your sort of decision to make, you know, what would you do? So really, then I'm guessing that there's three roles between the CFO, the CMO, and the CEO, and it's kind of like the CMO's job is to drive growth and try and and the CEO's job is to sort of balance the money versus the growth, and then the CFO's job is to protect the upside, right? And protect the upside and also the downside. Which one of those things do you think is the most important? Is it striving for growth? Is it, a black balance, or is it really sort of protecting the worst case scenario? Where would you say the
Um,
priority?
I definitely sit in the camp of growth that is pretty critical. I do that for a couple of reasons. That I think businesses that don't evolve ultimately fall by the wayside. Business needs constant change. Customers need requirements. They will always change. So I think if you're not pushing the boundary, get that balancing act though over it. And I think that's the bit where I have to sit and kind of flip flop between how much money's available, how much we can invest, and the timeframes for doing that, to making sure that, does your investment decision quite often, in my experience, quite often the Q4 investment cases only get spent smashing your number, but
Mm,
and that variable spend gets pulled in that quarter if ultimate numbers aren't doing so well. The problem with that is it then has a trickle-on effect into your next year, and actually you don't start the next year in the best line. And I think sometimes, I think you kind of have to divorce the year-end goals with the longer term. Just try and challenge and go, like, have a year end, would this change my decision-making
mm,
process? I think if you're in that position as a business where you can take longer term decisions, I think you make better decisions as a consequence.
yeah, excellent. All right. You mentioned a little while ago that obviously we know each other through B2B role, but you're currently in the B2C environments. Is there anything that you've learned from managing the P&L in the B2C that B2B marketers and CFOs can take on board, like from FMCG or from any of the roles you've done?
Planning different scenarios is without a doubt the biggest thing. I think in the businesses I've been in, so kind of Mindful Chef, the most complex business I'll ever and probably will ever work in terms of things that can go wrong out of your control. But you need to have different scenarios, different planning points. But actually, it makes you stronger. You actually scrutinize other cases, gives you different optionality and gives you different ways of solving problems. I think with every plan, it never comes in exactly how you planned it, but actually, by hook by crook, you can get to the same result in a different way. And I think having those different cases already thought out, already discussed, but you're not kind of thinking at it. No, we haven't outnumbered. Now I'm going to go away and do all the work. I think planning
Mm,
those ahead of schedule. Things move super quickly. I think they move quickly in both worlds, but in B2C, I think the customer needs and trends move much faster, and as a consequence of that, I think making sure you remain current. The competitor threat is a big issue, and I think
mm,
also outside your control. you know, the economy, depending on what's going out and other factors, it has a big impact in terms of disposable income. So I think having downside cases and upside cases and going, okay, like maybe we're just not getting the returns right now. So it's better not to spend this money at all and save this money for later in the year where we can get a better return. Um, you know, we spend quite a lot of money on Meta depending on what's going on with the algorithm, our returns. So I think sometimes accepting it's like, no, it's not, we're saying we don't want to spend, we don't believe in this product. We just need to save this money and save it for later in the year. So I think what I'm really trying to say is having a few different plans of, hey, this doesn't quite work out how we want, how are we going to adjust? And then if this doesn't come, how are we going to adjust? And I think having those all talked through and actually worked through ahead of schedule uh, will will help, end.
Brilliant. Right. So I guess really, just going to wrap things up now, actually. So in terms of the three main things, and I guess it's like making sure you start in the right place. So you start with a credible opportunity and a commercial plan behind it. Yeah. Then you work through it with the teams, marketing and finance together, and involve both from both sides. So finance understand marketing's world and vice versa. And then at the very top level, you're staying aligned and you're being honest about the risk, the trade-offs, and you've got multiple different scenarios planned because obviously things change. Fair summary?
Yeah, absolutely. That's great.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Andrew. It was super interesting. Please check out Andrew's LinkedIn profile and ours if you want to know more. But thank you for joining us today. And we're going to wrap things up there. So thanks very much. Cheers, then.
Thanks, Alan.
Thanks again. Bye.